12. The baby was a girl, born in the second month of the new year. She was her mother's daughter, born darker skinned than Joe would probably ever be. "About time I had a baby to look like me," said Alice when she saw her. "You could have at least tried for red hair," said Rufus. He was there too, peering at the baby's wrinkled little face, peering with even more concern at Alice's face, sweat-streaked and weary. For the first time and only time, I saw her smile at him. A real smile. No sarcasm, no ridicule. It silenced him for several seconds. Carrie and I had helped with the birth. Now we left quietly, both of us probably thinking the same thing, that if Alice and Rufus were going to make peace finally, neither of us wanted to break their mood. They called the baby Hagar. Rufus said that that was the ugliest name he had ever heard, but it was Alice's choice, and he let it stand. I thought it was the most beautiful name I had ever heard. I felt almost free, half free, if such a thing was possible, halfway home. I was gleeful at first, secretly elated. I even kidded Alice about the name she chose for her children, Joseph and Hagar, and the two others whose names I thought silently, Miriam and Aaron. I said, "Someday Rufus is going to get religion and read enough of the Bible to wonder about those children's names." Alice shrugged. "If Hagar had been a boy, I would have called her Ishmael. In the Bible, people might be slaves for a while, but they didn't have to stay slaves." My mood was so good, I almost laughed, but she wouldn't have understood that, and I couldn't have explained. I kept it all in somehow, and congratulated myself that the Bible wasn't the only place where slaves broke free. Her names were only symbolic, but I had more than symbols to remind me that freedom was possible, probable, and for me very near. Or was it? Slowly I began to calm down. The danger to my family was past, yes. Hagar had been born, but the danger to me personally still walked and talked and sometimes sat with Alice in her cabin in the evening as she nursed Hagar. I was there with them a couple of times, and I felt like an intruder. I was not free, not any more than Alice was, or her children with their names. In fact, it looked as though Alice might get free before I did. She caught me alone one evening and pulled me into her cabin. It was empty except for the sleeping Hagar. Joe was out collecting cuts and bruises from sturdier children. "Did you get the laudanum?" she demanded. I peered at her through the semi-darkness. Rufus kept her well supplied with candles, but at the moment the only light in the room came from the window and from a low fire over which two pots simmered. "Alice, are you sure you still want it?" I saw her frown. "Sure I want it. Course I want it. What's the matter with you?" I hedged a little. "It's so soon. The baby's only a few weeks old. You get me that stuff so I can leave when I want to." "I've got it." "Give it to me." "God damn it, Alice, will you slow down? Look, you keep working on him the way you have been, and you can get whatever you want and live to enjoy it." To my surprise, her stony expression crumbled, and she began to cry. "He'll never let any of us go," she said. "The more you give him, the more he wants." She paused, wiped her eyes, then added softly, "I got to go while I still can, before I turn into just what people call me." She looked at me and did the thing that made her so much like Rufus, though neither of them recognized it. "I got to go before I turn into what you are," she said bitterly. Sarah had cornered me once and said, "What do you let her talk to you like that for? She can't get away with it with nobody else." I didn't know. Guilt, maybe? In spite of everything, my life was easier than hers. Maybe I tried to make up for that by taking her abuse. Everything had its limits, though. "You want my help, Alice? You watch your mouth." "Watch yours," she mocked. I stared at her in astonishment, remembering. knowing exactly what she had overheard. "If I talked to him the way you do, he'd have me hanging in the barn," she said. "If you go on talking to me the way you do, I won't care what he does to you." She looked at me for a long time without saying anything. Finally, she smiled. "You'll care, and you'll help me. Else you'd have to see yourself for the white nigger you are, and you couldn't stand that." Rufus never called my bluff. Alice did it automatically, and because I was bluffing, she got away with it. I got up and walked away from her. Behind me, I thought I heard her laugh. Some days later, I gave her the laudanum. Later that same day, Rufus began talking about sending Joe to school up north when he was a little older. "Do you mean to free the boy, Ruf?" He nodded. "Good. Tell Alice. When I get around to it." I didn't argue with him. I told her myself. "It don't matter what he says," she told me. "Did he show you any free papers?" "No." "When he does, you read them to me. Maybe I'll believe him. I'm telling you, he uses those children just the way you use a bit on a horse. I'm tired of having a bit in my mouth." I didn't blame her. But still, I didn't want her to go, didn't want her to risk Joe and Hagar. Hell, I didn't even want her to risk herself. Elsewhere, under other circumstances, I would have probably disliked her. But here, we had a common enemy to unite us. 13. I planned to stay on the Whalen plantation long enough to see Alice leave, to find out whether she would be able to keep her freedom this time. I managed to talk her into waiting until early summer to go, and I was prepared to wait that long myself before I tried some dangerous trick that might get me home. I was homesick, and Kevin sick, and damn sick of Margaret Whalen's floor and Alice's mouth, but I could wait a few more months. I thought. I talked Rufus into letting me teach Nigel's two older sons and the two children who served at the table, along with Joe. Surprisingly, the children liked it. I couldn't recall having liked school much when I was their ages. Rufus liked it because Joe was as bright as I had said. Bright and competitive. He had a head start on the others, and he didn't intend to lose it. "Why weren't you like that about learning?" I asked Rufus. "Don't bother me," he muttered. Some of his neighbors found out what I was doing and offered him fatherly advice. It was dangerous to educate slaves, they warned. Education made blacks dissatisfied with slavery. It spoiled them for field work. The Methodist minister said it made them disobedient, made them want more than the Lord intended them to have. Another man said educating slaves was illegal. When Rufus replied that he had checked and that it wasn't illegal in Maryland, the man said it should have been. Talk. Rufus shrugged it off without ever saying how much of it he believed. It was enough that he sided with me, and my school continued. I got the feeling that Alice was keeping him happy and maybe finally enjoying herself a little in the process. I guessed from what she had told me that this was what was frightening her so, driving her away from the plantation, causing her to lash out at me. She was trying to deal with guilt of her own. But she was waiting and using some discretion. I relaxed, spent my spare moments trying to think of a way to get home. I didn't want to depend on someone else's chance violence again. Violence that, if it came, could be more effective than I wanted. Then Sam James stopped me out by the cookhouse, and my complacency was brought to an end. I saw him waiting for me beside the cookhouse door, a big young man. I mistook him for Nigel at first. Then I recognized him. Sarah had told me his name. He had spoken to me at the corn husking, and again at Christmas. Then Sarah had spoken to him for me, and he had said nothing else. Until now. "I'm Sam," he said. "Remember at Christmas?" "Yes, but I thought Sarah told you." "She did." Look, it ain't that. I just wanted to see if maybe you'd teach my brother and sister to read. You're... Oh, how old are they? Sister was born the year you came here last. Brother, the year before that. I'll have to get permission. Ask Sarah about it in a few days, but don't come to me again. I thought of the expression I had seen on Rufus's face as he looked at this man. Maybe I'm too cautious, but I don't want you getting into trouble because of me. He gave me a long, searching look. You want to be with that white man, girl? If I were anywhere else, no black child on the place would be learning anything. That ain't what I mean. Yes, it is. It's all part of the same thing. Some folks say, hold on. I was suddenly angry. I don't want to hear what some folks say. Some folks let Fowler drive them into the fields every day and work them like mules. Let him? Let him. They do it to keep the skin on their backs and breath in their bodies. Well, they're not the only ones who have to do things they don't like to stay alive and whole. Now, you tell me why that should be so hard for some folks to understand. He sighed. That's what I told them. But you better off than they are, so they get jealous. He gave me another of his long, searching looks. I still say it's too bad you already spoke for. I grinned. Get out of here, Sam. Field hands aren't the only ones who can be jealous. He went. That was all. Innocent. Completely innocent. But 3 days later, a traitor led Sam away in chains. Rufus never said a word to me. He didn't accuse me of anything. I wouldn't have known Sam had been sold if I hadn't glanced out the window of Margaret Whalen's room and seen the coffle. I told Margaret some hasty lie, then ran out of her room, down the stairs, and out the door. I ran headlong into Rufus and felt him steady me, hold me. The weakness that his dengue fever had left was finally gone. His grip was formidable. Get back in the house, he hissed. I saw Sam beyond him being chained into line. There were people a few feet away from him crying loudly. 2 women, a boy, and a girl. His family. Ruf, I pleaded desperately, don't do this. There's no need. He pushed me back toward the door and I struggled against him. Ruf, please. Listen, he came to ask me to teach his brother and sister to read. That's all. It was like talking to the wall of the house. I managed to break away from him for a moment, just as the younger of the 2 weeping women spotted me. You whore! She screamed. She had not been permitted to approach the coffle, but she approached me. You no-count nigger whore! Why couldn't you leave my brother alone? She would have attacked me, and field hand that she was, strengthened by hard work, she would probably have given me the beating she thought I deserved. But Rufus stepped between us. Get back to work, Sally. She didn't move, stood glaring at him until the older woman, probably her mother, reached her and pulled her away. I caught Rufus by the hand and spoke low to him. Please, Ruf, if you do this, you'll destroy what you mean to preserve. Please, don't. He hit me. It was a first and so unexpected that I stumbled backward and fell. And it was a mistake. It was the breaking of an unspoken agreement between us, a very basic agreement, and he knew it. I got up slowly, watching him with anger and betrayal. Get in the house and stay there, he said. I turned my back and went to the cookhouse, deliberately disobeying. I could hear one of the traders say, You ought to sell that one too, troublemaker. At the cookhouse, I heated water, got it warm, not hot. Then I took a basin of it up to the attic. It was hot there, and empty except for the pallets and my bag in its corner. I went over to it, washed my knife in antiseptic, and hooked the drawstring of my bag over my shoulder. And in the warm water, I cut my wrists. 3. A couple of Kevin's friends came over on the 4th of July and tried to get us to go to the Rose Bowl with them for the fireworks. Kevin wanted to go more to get out of the house than for any other reason, I suspected. I told him to go ahead, but he wouldn't go without me. As it turned out, there was no chance for me to go anyway. As Kevin's friends left the house, I began to feel dizzy. I stumbled toward my bag, fell before I reached it, crawled toward it, grabbed it just as Kevin came in from saying goodbye to his friends. "Dana," he was saying, "we can't stay cooped up in this house any longer waiting for something that isn't." He was gone. Instead of lying on the floor of my living room, I was lying on the ground in the sun, almost directly over a hill of large black ants. Before I could get up, someone kicked me, fell on me heavily. I had the breath knocked out of me for a moment. "Dinah," said Rufus's voice, "what the hell are you doing here?" I looked up, saw him sprawled across me where he had fallen. We got up just as something began to bite me. The ants, probably. I brushed myself off quickly. "I said, what are you doing here?" He sounded angry. He looked no older than he had been when I'd seen him last, but something was wrong with him. He looked haggard and weary, looked as though it had been too long since he'd slept last, looked as though it would be even longer before he was able to sleep again. "I don't know what I'm doing here, Ruth. I never know until I find out what's wrong with you." He stared at me for a long moment. His eyes were red, and under them were dark smudges. Finally, he grabbed me by the arm and led me back the way he had come. We were on the plantation, not far from the house. Nothing looked changed. I saw two of Nigel's sons wrestling, rolling around on the ground. They were the two I had been teaching, and they were no bigger than they had been when I saw them last. "Ruth, how long have I been gone?" He didn't answer. He was leading me toward the barn, I saw, and apparently I wasn't going to learn anything until I got there. He stopped at the barn door and pushed me through it. He didn't follow me in. I looked around, seeing very little at first as my eyes became accustomed to the dimmer light. I turned to the place where I had been strung up and whipped, and jumped back in surprise when I saw that someone was hanging there. Hanging by the neck. A woman. Alice. I stared at her, not believing, not wanting to believe. I touched her, and her flesh was cold and hard. The dead gray face was ugly in death as it had never been in life. The mouth was open. The eyes were open and staring. Her head was bare and her hair loose and short like mine. She had never liked to tie it up the way other women did. It was one of the things that had made us look even more alike. The only two consistently bareheaded women on the place. Her dress was dark red and her apron clean and white. She wore shoes that Rufus had made specifically for her, not the rough, heavy shoes or boots other slaves wore. It was as though she had dressed up and combed her hair, and then I wanted her down. I looked around, saw that the rope had been tied to a wall peg thrown over a beam. I broke my fingernails trying to untie it until I remembered my knife. I got it from my bag and cut Alice down. She fell stiffly like something that would break when it hit the floor, but she landed without breaking, and I took the rope from her neck and closed her eyes. For a time, I just sat with her, holding her head and crying silently. Eventually, Rufus came in. I looked up at him, and he looked away. "Did she do this to herself?" I asked. "Yes. to herself. Why? He didn't answer. Ruth? He shook his head slowly from side to side. Where are her children? He turned and walked out of the barn. I straightened Alice's body in her dress and looked around for something to cover her with. There was nothing. I left the barn and went across an expanse of grass to the cookhouse. Sarah was there chopping meat with that frightening speed and coordination of hers. I had told her once that it always looked as though she was about to cut off a finger or two, and she had laughed. She still had all 10. Sarah? There was such a difference in our ages now that everyone else my age called her Aunt Sarah. I knew it was a title of respect in this culture, and I respected her, but I couldn't quite manage Aunt any more than I could have managed Mammy. She didn't seem to mind. She looked up. Dana? Girl, what are you doing back here? What Ma's Ruth done now? I'm not sure. But Sarah, Alice is dead. Sarah put down her cleaver and sat on the bench next to the table. Oh, Lord. Poor child. He finally killed her. I don't know, I said. I went over and sat beside her. I think she did it to herself. Hung herself. I just took her down. He did it, she hissed. Even if he didn't put the rope on her, he drove her to it. He sold her babies. I frowned. Sarah had spoken clearly enough, loudly enough, but for a moment I didn't understand. Joe and Hagar? His children? What do he care about that? But he did care. He was going to... Why would he do such a thing? She run off. Sarah faced me. You must have known she was going. You and her was like sisters. I didn't need the reminder. I got up feeling that I had to move around, distract myself, or I would cry again. You sure fought like sisters, said Sarah. Always fussing at each other, stomping away from each other, coming back. Right after you left, she knocked the devil out of a field hand who was running you down. Had she? She would. Insulting me was her prerogative. No trespassing. I paced from the table to the hearth to a small work table. Back to Sarah. Dana, where is she? In the barn. He'll give her a big funeral. Sarah shook her head. It's funny. I thought she was finally settling down with him, getting not to mind so much. If she was, I don't think she could have forgiven herself for it. Sarah shrugged. When she ran, did he beat her? Not much. About much as old Moss Tom whipped you that time. That gentle spanking. Yes. The whipping didn't matter much, but when he took away her children, I thought she was going to die right there. She was screaming and crying and carrying on, and then she got sick and I had to take care of her. Sarah was silent for a moment. I didn't want to even be close to her. And Mas Tom sold my babies, I just wanted to lay down and die. Seeing her like she was brought all that back. Carrie came in then, her face wet with tears. She came up to me without surprise and hugged me. You know? I asked. She nodded, then made her sign for white people and pushed me toward the door. I went. I found Rufus at his desk in the library fondling a handgun. He looked up and saw me just as I was about to withdraw. It had occurred to me suddenly, certainly, that this was where he had been heading when he called me. What had his call been then? A subconscious desire for me to stop him from shooting himself? Come in, Dana. His voice sounded empty and dead. I pulled my old Windsor chair up to his desk and sat down. How could you do it, Ruth? He didn't answer. Your son and your daughter, how could you sell them? I didn't. That stopped me. I had been prepared for almost any other answer or no answer, but a denial? But, but she ran away. I know. We were getting along, you know. You were here. It was good. Once, when you were gone, she came to my room. She came on her own. Ruth, everything was all right. I even went on with Joe's lessons. Me, I told her I would free both of them. She didn't believe you. You wouldn't put anything into writing. I would have. I shrugged. Where are the children, Ruth? In Baltimore with my mother's sister. But why? To punish her, scare her, to make her see what could happen if she tried to leave me. Oh, God. But you could have at least brought them back when she got sick. I wish I had. Why didn't you? I don't know. I turned away from him in disgust. You killed her, just as though you had put that gun to her head and fired. He looked at the gun, put it down quickly. What are you going to do now? Now I just gone to get a coffin, a decent one, not just a little homemade box, and he'll hire a minister to come tomorrow. I mean, what are you going to do for your son and your daughter? He looked at me helplessly. 2 certificates of freedom, I said. You owe them that, at least. You've deprived them of their mother. Damn you, Dana. Stop saying that. Stop saying I killed her. I just looked at him. Why did you leave me? If you hadn't gone, she might not have run away. I rubbed my face where he had hit me when I begged him not to sell Sam. You didn't have to go. You were turning into something I didn't want to stay near. Silence. 2 certificates of freedom, Ruth. All legal. Raise them free. That's the least you can do. 4. There was an outdoor funeral the next day. Everyone attended. Field hands, house servants, even the indifferent Evan Fowler. The minister was a tall, coal-black, deep-voiced freedman with a face that reminded me of a picture I had of my father who had died before I was old enough to know him. The minister was literate. He held a Bible in his huge hands and read from Job and Ecclesiastes until I could hardly stand to listen. I had shrugged off my aunt and uncle's strict Baptist teachings years before. But even now, especially now, the bitter, melancholy words of Job could still reach me. Man that is born of a woman is of few days and full of trouble. He cometh forth like a flower and is cut down. He fleeth also as a shadow and continueth not. I kept quiet somehow, wiped away silent tears, beat away flies, and mosquitoes, heard the whispers. She gone to hell. Don't you know folks kills theyself goes to hell? Shut your mouth. Ma's Rufus'll make you think you down there with her. Rufus came back, came to the house carrying the dark little girl and leading the boy who seemed to look even more like him. Joe saw me in the hall and ran to me. Aunt Dana! Aunt Dana! And a hug later. I can read better now. Daddy's been teaching me. Want to hear? Sure I do. I looked up at Rufus. Daddy? He glared at me tight-lipped as though daring me to speak. All I had wanted to say, though, was, what took you so long? The boy had spent his short life calling his father master. Well, now that he no longer had a mother, I suppose Rufus thought it was time he had a father. I managed to smile at Rufus, a real smile. I didn't want him feeling embarrassed or defensive for finally acknowledging his son. He smiled back, seemed to relax. How about my getting classes going again? He nodded. I guess the others haven't had time to forget much. They hadn't. As it turned out, I had only been away for 3 months. The children had had a kind of early summer vacation. Now they went back to school. And I, slowly, delicately, went to work on Rufus, began to push him toward freeing a few more of them, perhaps several more of them, perhaps in his will, all of them. I had heard of slaveholders doing such things. The Civil War was still 30 years away. I might be able to get some of the adult slaves freed while they were still young enough to build new lives. I might be able to do some good for everyone, finally. At least I felt secure enough to try, now that my own freedom was within reach. Rufus had been keeping me with him more than he needed me now. He called me to share his meals openly, and he seemed to listen when I talked to him about freeing the slaves. But he made no promises. I wondered whether he thought making a will was foolish at his age, or maybe it was freeing more slaves that he thought was foolish. He didn't say anything, so I couldn't tell. Finally, though, he did answer me, told me much more than I had wanted to know. None of it should have surprised me at all. Dana, he said one afternoon in the library, I'd have to be crazy to make a will freeing these people and then tell you about it. I could die damn young for that kind of craziness. Tell me I can trust you. More discomfort. You keep doing things that make it impossible for me to trust you, even though you know it has to work both ways. He shook his head. I don't know. I never know how to treat you. You confuse everybody. You sound too white to the field hands, like some kind of traitor, I guess. I know what they think. Daddy always thought you were dangerous because you knew too many white ways, but you were black. Too black, he said. The kind of black who watches and thinks and makes trouble. I told that to Alice and she laughed. She said sometimes Daddy showed more sense than I did. She said he was right about you and that I'd find out someday. I jumped. Had Alice really said such a thing? And my mother, continued Rufus calmly, says if she closes her eyes while you and her are talking, she can forget you're black without even trying. I'm black, I said, and when you sell a black man away from his family just because he talked to me, you can't expect me to have any good feelings toward you. He looked away. We really hadn't discussed Sam before. We had talked around him, alluded to him without quite mentioning him. He wanted you, said Rufus bluntly. I stared at him, knowing now why we hadn't spoken of Sam. It was too dangerous. It could lead to speaking of other things. We needed safe subjects now, Rufus and I. The price of corn, supplies for the slaves, that sort of thing. Sam didn't do anything, I said. You sold him for what you thought he was thinking. He wanted you, Rufus repeated. So do you, I thought. No Alice to take the pressure off anymore. It was time for me to go home. I started to get up. Don't leave, Dinah. I stopped. I didn't want to hurry away, run away from him. I didn't want to give him any indication that I was going to the attic to reopen the tender new scar tissue at my wrists. I sat down again, and he leaned back in his chair and looked at me until I wished I had taken the chance of hurrying away. What am I going to do when you go home this time? He whispered. You'll survive. I wonder, why should I bother? For your children, at least, I said. Her children. They're all you have left of her. He closed his eyes, rubbed one hand over them. They should be your children now, he said. If you had any feelings for them, you'd stay. For them? You know I can't. You could if you wanted to. I wouldn't hurt you, and you wouldn't have to hurt yourself again. You wouldn't hurt me until something frustrated you, made you angry or jealous. You wouldn't hurt me until someone hurt you. Ruth, I know you. I couldn't stay here even if I didn't have a home to go back to and someone waiting for me there. That Kevin. Yes, I wish I had shot him. If you had, you'd be dead yourself by now. He turned his body so that he faced me squarely. You say that as though it means something. I got up to leave. There was nothing more to be said. He had asked for what he knew I could not give, and I had refused. You know, Dana, he said softly, when you sent Alice to me that first time, and I saw how much she hated me, I thought, I'll fall asleep beside her and she'll kill me. She'll hit me with a candlestick. She'll set fire to the bed. She'll bring a knife up from the cookhouse. I thought all that, but I wasn't afraid. Because if she killed me, that would have been that. Nothing else would matter. But if I lived, I would have her. And by God, I had to have her. He stood up and came over to me. I stepped back, but he caught my arms anyway. You're so much like her, I can hardly stand it, he said. Let go of me, Ruth. You were one woman, he said. You and her. One woman, two halves of a whole. I had to get away from him. Let me go or I'll make your dream real. Abandonment. The one weapon Alice hadn't had. Rufus didn't seem to be afraid of dying. Now in his grief, he seemed almost to want death. But he was afraid of dying alone, afraid of being deserted by the person he had depended on for so long. He stood holding my arms, perhaps trying to decide what he should do. After a moment, I felt his grip loosen, and I pulled away. I knew I had to go now before he submerged his fear. He could do it. He could talk himself into anything. I left the library, went up the main stairs, then the attic stairs, over to my bag, my knife. Footsteps on the stairs. The knife. I opened it, hesitated, then slipped the knife blades, still open, back into my bag. He opened the door, came in, looked around the big, hot, empty room. He saw me, but still he looked around to see whether we were alone. We were. He came over and sat next to me on my pallet. I'm sorry, Dana, he said. Sorry? For what he had nearly done or for what he was about to do? Sorry. He had apologized to me many times in many ways before, but his apologies had always been oblique. Eat with me, Dana. Sarah's cooking up something special. Or, here, Dana, here's a new book I bought for you in town. Or, here's some cloth, Dana. Maybe you could make yourself something from it. Things. Gifts given when he knew he had hurt or offended me, but he had never before said, I'm sorry, Dana. I looked at him uncertainly. I've never felt so lonesome in my life, he said. The words touched me as no others could have. I knew about loneliness. I found my thoughts going back to the time I had gone home without Kevin. The loneliness, the fear, sometimes the hopelessness I had felt then. Hopelessness wouldn't be a sometime thing to Rufus, though. Alice was dead and buried. He had only his children left, but at least one of them had also loved Alice. Joe. Where'd my mama go? He demanded on his first day home. Away, Rufus had said. She went away. When's she coming back? I don't know. The boy came to me. Aunt Dana, where'd my mama go? Honey, she died. Died? Yes, like old Aunt Mary, who at last had drifted the final distance to her reward. She had lived over 80 years, had come over from Africa, people said. Nigel had made a box, and Mary had been laid to rest near where Alice lay now. But Mama wasn't old. No, she was sick, Joe. Daddy says she went away. Well, to heaven. No. He had cried, and I had tried to comfort him. I remembered the pain of my own mother's death, grief, loneliness, uncertainty in my aunt and uncle's house. I had held the boy and told him he still had his daddy, please God, and that Sarah and Carrie and Nigel loved him. They wouldn't let anything happen to him, as though they had the power to protect him or even themselves. I let Joe go to his mother's cabin to be alone for a while. He wanted to. Then I told Rufus what I had done, and Rufus hadn't known whether to hit me or thank me. He had glared at me, the skin of his face drawn tight and tense. Then finally he had relaxed and nodded and gone out to find his son. Now he sat with me, being sorry and lonely and wanting me to take the place of the dead. You never hated me, did you? He asked. Never for long. I don't know why. You worked hard to earn my hatred, Ruth. She hated me from the first time I forced her. I don't blame her. Until just before she ran, she had stopped hating me. I wonder how long it'll take you. What? To stop hating? Oh, God. Almost against my will, I closed my fingers around the handle of the knife, still concealed in my bag. He took my other hand, held it between his own in a grip that I knew would only be gentle until I tried to pull away. Ruth, I said, your children. They are free, but they're young. They need you to protect their freedom. And it's up to you, isn't it? I twisted my hand, tried to get it away from him in sudden anger. At once, his hold went from caressing to imprisoning. My right hand had become wet and slippery on the knife. It's up to you, he repeated. No, goddammit, it isn't. Keeping you alive has been up to me for too long. Why didn't you shoot yourself when you started to? I wouldn't have stopped you. I know. The softness of his voice made me look up at him. So what else do I have to lose? He asked. He pushed me back on the pallet, and for a few moments we lay there, still. What was he waiting for? What was I waiting for? He lay with his head on my shoulder, his left arm around me, his right hand still holding my hand, and slowly I realized how easy it would be for me to continue to be still and forgive him even this. So easy, in spite of all my talk. But it would be so hard to raise the knife, drive it into the flesh I had saved so many times. So hard to kill. He was not hurting me, would not hurt me if I remained as I was. He was not his father, old and ugly, brutal and disgusting. He smelled of soap as though he had bathed recently. For me, the red hair was neatly combed and a little damp. I would never be to him what Tess had been to his father, a thing passed around like the whiskey jug at a husking. He wouldn't do that to me, or sell me, or... No. I could feel the knife in my hand, still slippery with perspiration. A slave was a slave. Anything could be done to her. And Rufus was Rufus, erratic, alternately generous and vicious. I could accept him as my ancestor, my younger brother, my friend, but not as my master. and not as my lover. He had understood that once. I twisted sharply, broke away from him. He caught me, trying not to hurt me. I was aware of him trying not to hurt me, even as I raised the knife, even as I sank it into his side. He screamed. I had never heard anyone scream that way. An animal sound. He screamed again, a lower, ugly gurgle. He lost his hold on my hand for a moment, but caught my arm before I could get away. Then he brought up his fist of his free hand to punch me once and again as the patroller had done so long ago. I pulled the knife free of him somehow, raised it, and brought it down again into his back. This time he only grunted. He collapsed across me, somehow still alive, still holding my arm. I lay beneath him, half conscious from the blows and sick. My stomach seemed to twist, and I vomited on both of us. Dana? A voice. A man's voice. I managed to turn my head and see Nigel standing in the doorway. Dana, what? Oh, no. God, no. Nigel, moaned Rufus, and he gave a long, shuddering sigh. His body went limp and leaden across me. I pushed him away somehow, everything but his hand still on my arm. Then I convulsed with terrible, wrenching sickness. Something harder and stronger than Rufus's hand clamped down on my arm, squeezing it, stiffening it, pressing into it, painlessly at first, melting into it, meshing with it as though somehow my arm were being absorbed into something cold and non-living. Something. Paint, plaster, wood, a wall. The wall of my living room. I was back at home in my own house, in my own time. But I was still caught somehow, joined to the wall as though my arm were growing out of it, or growing into it. From the elbow to the ends of the fingers, my left arm had become a part of the wall. I looked at the spot where flesh joined with plaster, stared at it uncomprehending. It was the exact spot Rufus's fingers had grasped. I pulled my arm toward me, pulled hard, and suddenly there was an avalanche of pain, red, impossible agony, and I screamed and screamed.